I think this notion of international rules is very comfortable for some people to use when it suits them, but they don't believe in international rules when it doesn't suit them, because they don't apply international rules or law equally in all circumstances. So you can't say because Ukraine has been invaded that suddenly sovereignty is important, but it was never important for Palestine.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Manhattan Town Project of the LaRouche organization for Saturday, February 3rd. You've just been listening briefly there to the Foreign Minister of South Africa, Naledi Pandor. And what she's pointing out there about the double standard of actions taken by both nations and institutions around the issue of not merely sovereignty, but who is human and who is not, is what we're here to discuss today. We've called the show How to Think in a Time of Crisis, How to Think and Act in a Time of Crisis. So where are we? What's the crisis we're looking at? Well, NATO is presently involved in the largest military maneuver since the Cold War, 90,000 military personnel in total, strategic defender. You have the EU, which has just voted for another 50 billion euro or $54 billion to go to Ukraine. You have U.S. Patriot missile systems being used to shoot down planes over Russian territory. The United States launching a kind of unacknowledged war or war dance with Iran by hitting targets in Syria and Iraq. And you have 18 nations which have now withdrawn life support from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. It's an agency that's been operating since 1949 and is absolutely essential to keeping life together in Palestine. This is an immediate threat to the lives of over 500,000 children, including 50,000 unborn children presently in Palestine. So when you have a circumstance in which all these different things are arrayed, an obvious question comes up. How does an individual think about what to do, and how do they then do the right thing? So to discuss this today, we've put together a show of a very specific type. We're going to start today with Anastasia Battle, who is the acting organizer or chairman, if you want to put it that way, not chairman, but the coordinator of the International Peace Coalition. This is an enterprise that was begun by Helga Zepp-LaRouche about 36 weeks ago. And so Anastasia is going to open, and then she's going to introduce Helga, who has some things to say to us as well. So Anastasia.
Yeah, well, I'll just tell you, thank you for having me on. I think that we've reached a certain point in history right now where everyone just kind of feels like something huge is about to happen. And the International Peace Coalition, like Dennis had said, was created 35 weeks ago. It was initiated by Helga Zepp-LaRouche in collaboration with myself and a number of other people. And our decision to do this was to say, look, we've got to bring people together above their ideologies, above their nationalities, and to say we need to organize for an international peace project, despite all of these differences that people have, to come together for true peace. And what we've seen over the last 35 weeks is just a total growing and blossoming of new leadership, of people who are coming back into leadership, people who thought maybe that they had been retired for a while and decided that they're going to change, or even old leaders who've decided that they need to change the way that they think. And I think that, like we brought up before on these discussions, that in a time of crisis, this is when people decide to do great things and great change can come about. And I want to point out a particular situation that's happened looking at Chicago. Going back 3 weeks ago, there was an emergency summit, which was held in Chicago, headed up by this group called Rainbow Push, the Rainbow Push Coalition. This is Jesse Jackson's organization. And a ceasefire resolution had just been put into the city council just weeks prior. And what came out of this emergency summit was a dedication from leaders from all over the country who flew in to discuss how do we achieve true peace in Gaza. These were interfaith leaders, Muslims, Christians, Jews. This was civil rights leaders. These were really strong and dedicated organizers. And we had a number of discussions, but in particular, the ceasefire resolution in Chicago was highlighted because this would be the largest city in the country to pass a ceasefire resolution for peace in Israel and Gaza. And just in the discussions I've had with the organizers, which it was an incredibly dramatic and amazing process that went on. By report, 165 organizations participated in the coalition to get this ceasefire passed. You had a whole citywide city district school walkout where 12 schools walked out and the students marched from their schools to the city council. You had the ADL pumping in money to try to threaten aldermen, tell them if you vote yes for a ceasefire, then we're going to take away the money to schools and we're going to take away the money to finance projects that you want built for the poor. I mean, it was absolutely disgusting, some of the things that I was being told that happened to people. So there was a ton of fear going in. And it was a process of really strengthening the moral courage of not only the aldermen who decided to vote yes, but also the people who were organizing to keep the strength and to not just be angry about what's happening in the world, but to express what the solution could be. And I think that that's what you see with this kernel of the civil rights movement, which is now, in my view, has been activated in this process, these interfaith networks. And this absolutely has to be spread around the country. So the day of the vote, when the day of the vote finally happened just this past Wednesday, which it was 3 hours, there were people waiting outside and people inside the lobby. Inside the lobby, chants could be heard, ceasefire now. They were going after Alderman Silverstein, who was one of the worst counter-organizers against the ceasefire. They were chanting, Silverstein, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. And that was echoing throughout the chambers. You can hear some of the chanting actually in the video footage and some of the people in the, I guess the balcony, you could say, chanting and yelling and whatnot. It was a pretty wild process. By report, I heard that what happened with all of these people, it just kept growing and growing to about 5,000. It could have been more. There were people outside in the streets, and it was incredibly diverse. Like I had said, 165 organizations who participated, political people, organizations from different nationalities, school teachers, student organizations, just all across the board. People came together to support one another, to really strike the nerve of morality in the city, that this had to happen. And it came down to a tie of 23 yeses and 23 nos. And the tiebreaker was the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Johnson, who had already been organized to come out in support of this ceasefire resolution. So he broke the tie by voting yes. That's how close this came. And when it passed, it was just, you could just feel it. I actually jumped up. I was watching this live. I jumped up screaming, oh my God, it passed. And I immediately started thinking, oh my God, this is absolutely going to change what people think is possible in the country. And this is what happened during the civil rights movement, that you had people coming together around these higher conceptions of humanity, right? We have to be the moral voice for the American citizenry. And I truly do believe that what you've seen in this massive amount of organizing and effort, phone calls, there were people nationally coming in trying to help, get the word out and what was going on and support it, as well as, the people who were counter-organizing, really just proves what the potential is right now. And I'm here in Detroit, Michigan, and what I can feel is that this is about to break. This is really about to grow. And my intention is to foster this, to keep bringing these ideas, to unify the American people, and really the people of the world, which is what we've done with the International Peace Coalition around these higher conceptions of man. That's really what's going to drive people and bring people to achieve true justice in the world. So I want to encourage everyone who's watching to participate in that and get involved in that. And let's get some more of these resolutions passed. Let's get some more of these rallies and demonstrations going. Let's have more meetings. Let's get this interfaith process really going. I think that this is the kernel of not just getting peace in Gaza, but also true peace in the world. That's really very, very important. So I want to open it up for what Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche said yesterday on the International Peace Coalition, and pull that up in her remarks and what she thinks we should be doing right now. Do you have that clip?
Let me greet all of you. I think everybody is aware of the extraordinary, unprecedented escalation of the situation in Gaza, where, you had the historic finding of the International Court of Justice on January 26, where the court ruled that in a provisional finding that there is plausible cause to assume that there is genocide going on, and they defined a whole set of measures which Israel was supposed to implement to remedy the situation and prevent genocide from happening, including massively increasing the humanitarian aid, preventing any further deterioration of the situation by replacement and similar things. And then basically the court gave Israel 4 weeks to report back to the court about the success of the implementation of these measures. Now, that was clear. It was a historic ruling. It was, really a relief that there was justice possible by the highest court of the world. But then on the same evening, the Israeli government accused 12 members of the UNRWA, the UN relief organization, that they would have cooperated with Hamas in the terror attack on October 6 in last year. And then immediately, without waiting for any confirmation of this report from any independent side, several governments, including the United States, Great Britain, Germany, France, and some others, immediately cut off all funding for the UNRWA, which means that the only organization which has been in charge of providing, food deliveries, medicine, and any other kind of deliveries was basically cut off money, and that money is about to run out the latest by the end of this month. Now, immediately afterwards, it was, increased by accusing 10% of all UNRWA members of having relations to Hamas. Now, this is playing on the ignorance of people, because Hamas is the elected government in Gaza, and if UNRWA or any other aid organizations wants to do anything, they are the only existing partner with whom to do such dealings. But that was naturally not reported by the mainstream media. Now, there are several countries who did not cut aid. That was Norway, Ireland, and Spain. The German government, the foreign ministry said that while they cut financial aid to UNRWA, they would continue the humanitarian aid through organizations like UNICEF and some others. But that is completely fraudulent, because if you don't have anybody to deliver the food and the medicine, then it is a total cut-off. Now that means then 2 days later, or on the 30th of January, that's 4 days later, the IDF made public that they are flooding the tunnels of Hamas. And this had been discussed as an option already in newspaper articles before, and several water hydro experts had clearly warned what would be the effect if you are flooding the very long and many tunnels of Hamas. That with salt water, that completely destroys the aquifers, the groundwater for maybe 100 years or more to come. It makes undrinkable the water for 85% or so of the population. And in any case, the whole policies of the IDF have resulted in that more than 1.5 million Palestinians are being driven into a very tiny area near Fatah, basically being completely dependent on any kind of supply, which now is cut off. So the effect of this is that what was threatening to become a famine and starvation and dying by thirst is now actually happening these very hours and very days. So this is an escalation which is so unbelievable that it goes beyond any imagination. The mainstream media in Germany, for example, is pretty much blocking it out, having instead stories about the anniversary of the Holocaust, the anti-Semitism on the rise in Germany. All of these things may have some merit, but they serve at this point as a major deflection of what the ruling was in Den Haag, which was never really discussed, nor what the effect is of cutting the funding to UNRWA, nor flooding the tunnels. So there is a almost complete press blackout, at least, maybe a tiny news here and there, but it's not entering the public perception. So I think that the measures by Israel, both the accusation of UNRWA and the flooding of the tunnels, for sure will be mentioned in now less than 3 weeks from now, when the court in Den Haag is reassembling, and they for sure will take note of this, that Israel not only did not do all the measures they were supposed to prevent genocide from happening. This was the formulation by the court, but the opposite occurred. Now, we should really be aware that given the fact that most of the countries involved have undersigned the Genocide Convention, they are actually obliged to prevent this genocide, and they're doing the opposite. Now, what that will mean, I don't want to take ahead the decision of the court, but it could very well be that all of these governments who are doing all of these things right now will be found complicit in genocide. And what that will do to the international order is just again beyond the imagination, because already now there are many signs that Germany is becoming completely isolated. Cultural people, artists are pulling out of any cooperation with Germany. In the global south, the opinion is horrified, but it will mean that the West is losing moral standing, or has already lost moral standing, and that will escalate tremendously. So it does aggravate the whole strategic situation, because at the same time, we had now almost every defense minister of all the NATO countries coming out with absolute hysteric warnings that there will be war with Russia in 18 months, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years. It varies according to the country, but they all are, and naturally also NATO itself, Rob Bauer, the admiral who is the head of the military command, warning that people must get ready to live through the first 36 hours of a Russian attack by getting batteries and water and whatnot. So a certain amount of fear is being installed, and this whole supposed threat of a coming war with Russia could become, and likely will become, a self-fulfilling prophecy if we do not change course. Now, I think that the situation in Ukraine from the side of NATO is scheduled to stay for, the war is supposed to stay for many years, because the EU just this morning agreed on a budget of providing another 50 billion to Ukraine in the next 4 years. This totally disregards the fact that the Ukrainian population is not there to conduct such a war, because they have a tremendous shortage of soldiers, tremendous shortage of workers, because they're either dead or abroad. So it's a completely cynical approach, no discussion about a diplomatic solution coming from these circles. And I think that, the danger is that if we stay on this geopolitical confrontation against Russia, against China, it is a question of almost certainty that the situation is going to end up in a third world war. I should mention that the situation in the Middle East is all geared up about a potential war with Iran, which, if it would come to that, could also escalate the war into a global war much more rapidly. Now, I should mention that the New York Times today reports that over 800 officials, civil servants, have put out a statement protesting the action of their governments. This is the United States, Great Britain, and several European countries, where these 800 civil servants basically say that they are dedicated to the constitution of their country, and that they regard what the present government policies are doing as detrimental to the interest of their countries and very, very dangerous. And they basically come out in a wave of protest. So there is some opposition developing, but I think we need to really come to the conclusion that on the one side we absolutely have to do something to stop what is happening in Gaza, because the 3 weeks left until Den Haag meets again may not see many Palestinians alive if this is not changed. So we need an immediate, absolute, urgent mobilization to all possible channels. Contacting the religions, contacting the different civil organizations, elected officials, but there must be an intervention to stop this and resume the situation by implementing all the measures which the International Court of Justice had provided for Israel to do to prevent genocide. And that must happen immediately. But more generally, I think that we need to change the directionality of the whole situation, because, if you want to make an enemy, you just have to keep repeating that you are the enemy and you will make an enemy. I think we need an absolute change. The way out would be very easy if the people of Europe and the United States would declare firmly that we want to cooperate with the global south, with the global majority, and that we can find a solution in this cooperation very easily, that could happen. That could happen tomorrow, because I'm 100% certain that the BRICS plus the global south countries would absolutely welcome any such gesture coming from the global north. I think we need to also really seriously think of how we can put the international security and development architecture as the only way out on the agenda. But I think the immediate situation now really is the saving of the people of Palestine.
So we want to discuss some of the potentials to do the kind of thing that Helga was talking about there in the various kinds of discussion that she went through. And what I want to do here is to focus for a minute on particularly a process which has been particularly remarkable in Europe in the agricultural sector. But just as with the process that Anastasia described in Chicago, nobody is actually accurately reporting much of this to the American people or the people, for that matter, of Europe. And so we have two individuals who are going to talk to us now. Rainer Apel of Germany, who works on the European intelligence sector for Executive Intelligence Review, and Bob Baker of the United States, who's a farm leader, longtime associate of the LaRouche organization and the Schiller Institute Agricultural Liaison. So we're going to start with you first, Rainer, and then go to Bob.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you're very clear.
Sometimes the connection is not so good. I try my very best. So, yeah, it's a very interesting development. So, first of all, what the farmers did in Germany took the government by surprise, and that's good news, because there's all reason they have to feel that they don't have the situation under control. And the first farmers' protests were in December 8, were rather mild compared to what has been going on afterwards. So December 8, we had 2,000 tractors coming in for a tractorcade into the German capital of Berlin. And there were some other such tractorcades in various parts of the country. But that was still in the dimension of previous protests by the agricultural sector. Beginning of January 8, we had some bigger events regionally, and one in Berlin, and it was already visible that the movement was growing in support by other sectors. So at tractorcades, a lot of trucks and other vehicles were spotted, indicating that some other branches of the German economy were joining the protest. On January 15, we had these 100,000 tractors rolling in Germany, and basically in all of the 100 bigger cities of the country, and was a very powerful thing, particularly because the mass media did have to take notice of that. They did have to report not that much as they should, but they did report, and it did have an effect. Since then, the idea of the official farmers' organizations was that the protests should stop for a while and leave room for dialogue with the government. But that was not the feeling of many of the activists of the farmers' movement, who said that we were not here to just discuss this or that concession, to just accept this or one concession, but we want change of the entire agricultural policy, particularly an organization called Countryside Creates Connection, which was formed in 2019, played a role in keeping protest movement alive. Highway blockades, they began to blockade seaports of Germany. they began to blockade inland water ports, arguing that these are important for bringing in all the imported food, which goes at the expense of our own production. This goes back to special agreements negotiated between the European Union and countries of the developing sector, the global south, so to speak. And this has to change. We need parity prices. We need an end of the policies of set-aside. We need an end of the policies that ban pesticides, insecticides. We are all reasonable people. We don't have to be lectured on agriculture by anybody. We are responsible. We can judge by ourselves what is good for bad, and that's what we want to do. And we don't want any bureaucracy of Brussels or else to intervene. Food, it has its price, and the price must be paid. It's just demand by the people that produce this food. Food produced under conditions and allowed to come in by import is not just. We must fight that. Now, this farmers' movement had meanwhile been making other steps, and we see first signs of a Mittelstand movement, a general movement of medium and small-sized companies. On 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting in Eastern Saxony of the already mentioned Countryside Creates Connection group. They passed a resolution of 12 points, and some of the points are very interesting. First of all, they say discrimination and lack of support to the SMEs, which is the small and medium-sized companies in general, must stop. There must be a change of policy. They said we need a change of development policy in order to pay interest to the genuine, to pay attention to the genuine interests of those that work work under scandalous conditions in this developing sector. What we need is a new policy for the transport sector, and we need changes in the education. The farmer bashing which occurs in schools and at universities has to stop. They said in order to change things, the school curricula should include something which opens the minds of young people to the role of agriculture and other sectors of this economy. So you see, with this kind of resolution for which they want to gather signatures among the population, they deploy now in smaller groups, not the big tractorcades anymore. That has worked well, but in the past, but now they change to other forms of organization, which is to deploy to supermarkets, talking to people. They just put a handful of tractors there, discuss with people, handing out their petitions, gathering signatures. They deploy to food depots of the big supermarket chains to discuss their new policy of fair and just production. And they do what I mentioned with the ports, the seaports. They talk to dock workers. And so it's becoming a movement that has grown out already of the immediate agricultural interest into a movement that is representing the so-called Mittelstand, which is the 100,000 and more smaller companies that are the hardcore of Germany's industrial production, just the big industry, the big companies. It's these small companies that produce most of the stuff that Germany has to offer. So to sum it up, this movement is taking an interesting development. This is not what the official agricultural associations would like, because they are sleeping in one bed with the politicians, but it's a thing that has begun Germany. I think and important discourse because all the rest of Europe looks Germany, what's going on there. We've had since the German protest started, more and more European countries beginning similar developments in France, in Belgium, in Eastern Europe, in Ireland, and in Spain and Portugal. So it's important that we continue this process with our own input naturally here in Germany, and then contribute to building an international movement which the vector of which is pointing towards the BRICS, the Global South, cooperation with the Global South. That's what we called for in the past in election campaigns. We said that build tractors instead of tanks, or saying build bridges instead of throwing bombs. So it's exactly what we have demanded in the past in the Schiller Institute, in the other organizations. And so it's very interesting and delightful to see that's happening in Germany, and it's a sign of hope in this horrible world situation.
It was a comprehensive report. We'll go right now to Bob Baker. I know you're going to have questions to some discussion we'll get back to. Somebody wrote me a couple of notes about what Anastasia had said as well. So Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Dennis. So, Jose, if you put up that graphic with the 12 columns on it. So we got thousands of farmers, as Reiner just mentioned, increase in Europe this month for one overriding reason: they cannot operate at a loss. And in the U.S., we've had 39,700 farms closed down in the 5-year period of 2017 to 2023. That hasn't really made the headlines too much. According to the Department of Agriculture figures, and these were given by the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, at a conference that he put together. And actually, it's the other one where the columns go vertical, Jose. And but he gave a speech, the Secretary of Agriculture at Cornell University, which is one of the major agriculture universities in the United States, and he reported that we've lost 6.9 million acres of farmland in the same period that we lost 39,000 farmers. And the farm shutdown is occurring in all the states and across all types of farming, and dairy farming in particular. So this is a very important period. Now, Jose, you might find another graph there. It's got the record number of farm cash and collect. And it was one of the first ones. But what we have is something that's that the dairy.
I'm having a lot of trouble with your connection. Hold on for a minute. Jose, is his connection going to improve if he turns off his camera and then you just use his graphics? Does that work?
Let's try that. Yeah.
Okay. Is he for? Okay. Let's see if we can use that. Bob, did you hear us? So have we lost his connection at this point, or what's the story?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Well, why don't we do the following? If we've lost his connection, let me do one thing, because I believe Ray has connected to us, and there was a question or response to what Anastasia was saying before. I think it's important. At the beginning of the discussion, Anastasia Battle went through what had happened in Chicago. She didn't have a chance to discuss what had happened in Detroit, Michigan, with congressional delegations, but she kept referencing the idea of the civil rights movement, and it had referenced that Jesse Jackson, for example, well known to people both in Chicago and around the United States as being involved in the civil rights movement from the 1960s, played a role in the passing of this resolution. So, Anastasia, you could say a little bit about that because I wanted Ray McGovern to hear a bit about that, just for the purpose of having Ray, so that he knows. I mentioned it to him before earlier today, but maybe you can say a little bit about what's happening in Michigan as well as in Chicago. Be helpful. I think you're muted. You're muted.
There we go. I was double muted.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Right.
Okay, so I had mentioned this Rainbow Push meeting that was put on, this emergency summit for peace in Gaza, which happened about 3 weeks ago. And I was told actually by the organizers that Jesse Jackson hadn't really been engaged much until that meeting. And it was actually kind of wonderful to watch him. I mean, here's a historical person who worked directly with Martin Luther King, sitting in the front, and he's not doing very well, physically, but he's still there. And the energy just became very electric, and he started chanting free, free Palestine, and telling organizers, look, we gotta get the people, we've got to get the funds, and we got to get ourselves organized. And he started mobilizing, and he personally went door to door to the aldermen and gave them a letter that he wrote endorsing the ceasefire and why they should also be in support of the ceasefire resolution. I think that this was incredibly important because his voice, despite his illness and the problems that he has because of it, resonated very strongly with the people of the city. And it activated this, really what I think is there's a soul in the United States of people who want to do what's right. They want to do the things for the good. And I think that that's what's really very much needed right now. And that'll tie into what happened here in Detroit, Michigan, which unfortunately I was sick, but my husband attended this. So right after the ICJ ruling, it just happened to be planned that my Congressman Shree, who's really like a no-name guy, came out of nowhere, some kind of self-proclaimed millionaire. He held a town hall meeting, and there was about 80 people there, and 75 people showed up there to demand a ceasefire. The whole room was totally filled with people who were peppering him with questions, telling him he was lying. And if you don't know about this congressman, he signed this disgusting letter to Blinken saying how disgusting the ICJ ruling was. So this really just ticked people off. And there were questions from, these were all, most of these people we've met and know, and they are constituents of Shree, and they were demanding the ceasefire to happen, and they were very calm in the sense that their questions were understandable, and it wasn't just rageful. So I think that's actually an important distinction, that it wasn't just screaming and yelling. Going up to the very end, you had the bulk of the room stood up and started chanting ceasefire now. The crew that was outside, which was about 20, 30 people, came inside and joined. And there was just this whole circle of people. There's video footage of this around the congressman. And he kind of very, I don't know, it was kind of weird actually, kind of creepily walked into the middle of this, of these people who were chanting ceasefire
Anastasia,
now.
we happen to have a little bit of that footage. We can show it right now.
You have it? Yeah. Why don't you show it? Yeah. Why don't you show it?
Ceasefire now! 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 Ceasefire now!
So you can see that it was quite an intense town hall meeting. And, excuse me, at a certain point, my husband and one of the other lead organizers there tried to calm everybody down for a moment and say, let's let him respond. And one of the organizers went over to Shri, put his arm around him and tapped him on the heart. And they said, Shri, why don't you speak from the heart instead of, and he tapped him on the butt, instead of from your wallet. Go ahead, say what you want to say. And so Shri very nervously said, well, I'm not ready for a ceasefire. And of course, people then, started chanting ceasefire now. And you can hear from that recording, people were saying, just say it. Just say ceasefire. Just say it. I think this is incredibly important. He ended up slinking out, but before he slinked out, there was a boy who walked over to him to shake his hand. And he was like, oh, finally, a child that I can talk to. Turns out he was a Palestinian boy. And the mother stood up and said, that's my son. And he only came up to you to talk to you because he wants to demand a ceasefire now. And so, sure enough, the congressman freaked out again. And that's when he did slink out. But I think that what you're seeing with this process between what happened in Detroit, what's happening in Chicago, the fact that Joe Biden is being intervened on basically at every single opportunity that's possible. I found out that that Dearborn, the mayor of Dearborn, refused to meet with President Biden. A lot of this is going on right now. And anyway, I think that this is an incredibly important process, and it really is the kernel of a civil rights movement in the United States.
Okay, very good. Do we, Jose, if we aren't able to do anything with that connection yet with Bob Baker?
Probably maybe like a couple minutes.
Okay, no problem. No, we have plenty. So that's why I just need to know. What we'll do is, Ray, if you don't have an immediate response, I think what we'll do is go to Professor Boyd-Barrett, who I'll introduce and keep things moving, unless you'd like to respond to Anastasia at this point.
Well, all I can say to Anastasia is way to go. And, this can happen in other cities and towns as well. We live now in the capital of North Carolina called Raleigh. I'm trying to get the pronunciation right. We call it Raleigh back in New York. Now, the Raleigh City Council had been deliberating on a similar resolution, ceasefire now, for about 5 weeks. Tuesday, I'm signed up again to speak. It will be quite something if a rather conservative state here had its capital come out for a ceasefire now. It kind of shows that outside of Dearborn and outside of Chicago, there are all manner of places that can listen to reason. And if enough pressure is put on the people who we constituents put in office, good things can happen. So my hat's off to Chicago. I know Reverend Jackson. I speak with Santita, his daughter, regularly on her morning rush hour radio show. I am so delighted to hear what Chicago ended up doing. So hats off to all. That means we can all do something.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And I understand that Bob is back. If that's the case, Jose, let's go back to him. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I hope this works. And so as I was trying to compare what's going on in the U.S. to what we heard from Reiner that has hit all across Europe with the hundreds of thousands of tractors in the streets, which is exceptionally moralizing and really gives you an indication of the degree to which the farm food production crisis is serious. But what I wanted to mention is, and if we can get those graphics up, the one that says about record all-time collapse there, Jose. But if not, I'll just proceed. But so we had the Secretary of Agriculture of the United States addressed this big conference in Cornell University a couple weeks ago, and he said that what we have in the United States is we have about 2.1 million farms total, and he said 7.5% of those farms produce 89% of the food. 89% of the food produced in the United States is produced by 7.5% of the farmers. And if you calculate that out, I think the biggest football stadium we have is in Michigan. I think it's the biggest in by far. And it would have a lot of extra room if all those farmers got in that stadium. That's how small the United States workforce producing most of the food has went. So when you start looking at the various types of things that we're dealing with in terms of the U.S., the worst is the income coming into the dairy sector, which has dropped 81%. Now I'll jump right here. That's good. Thank you. This is a chart of the decline in U.S. net cash farm income. You'll see the red figure at the end says a negative $61 billion, and that's a record large year-to-year decline in inflation-adjusted net cash farm income. Now that whole chart is inflation adjusted for 93 years. And if you, so that means that all the dollars are the same. But if you go back to that period around 1972, you'll see it took a big jump there, the income. Now that was right after Nixon unhooked the dollar from the Bretton Woods system and floated the dollar. The U.S. currency collapsed 50%, which made the U.S. Grain the cheapest grain in the world. And maybe you could put that back up, Jose, and the same one. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that was a manipulation deliberately done, and you see how the income went up and then it crashed. And then all of a sudden land prices went up in the 70s and early 80s. We got to 20% interest rates, and now we see record high, and we just had an all-time record collapse in U.S. net cash farm income. Okay, go to the next one, Jose. And I want to, it's good for people to see this graphically. Now, this is 2023. This is what happened. Rapid declines in the farm level income. Dairy farms, income crashed 81%. Poultry, 43%. Hogs, a negative almost 40%. Other livestock was down. You got cotton, you got the corn farms down 19, soybeans down 19, wheat, but you see it's all down. And this is at the same year that we see the biggest outcry of protest in the history of Europe, with hundreds of thousands of farmers on the street. Now, 100,000 farm tractors is much more powerful than 100,000 tanks, because those farmers go out every year and they do battle on a battlefield that is the farmland of the. They take on the elements, the weather. They produce food for everybody to eat, while we spend trillions of dollars on a military industrial complex that blows up things, destroys the infrastructure and the food growing potential of people, among other things, all across the world. Now, you should have a chart there, Jose. If you put up the next one, I think that'll be very interesting because I'm trying to give people some sort of a comparison of what we mean when we talk about the agricultural financial complex and how the consolidation of production into smaller and smaller hands is taking place all across the world, but especially here in the United States, because as that actually isn't the right one, but you got another one there, and but you can see certain dynamics. Now, as the Secretary of Agriculture said, 1.5% of the farmers produce 89% of the food. It's just mind-boggling when you have 2 million farmers, at least that's what they say we have. But you see what we've got when you start dissecting those groupings, you got smaller and smaller numbers of corporate structures getting financed by international global money that are putting together and helping to consolidate not only the production on the farms, but also the production of the machinery, the farm inputs, and that type of thing. So I wanted to really kind of convey that concept to people in terms of how the monopolization and the consolidation of food production in the United States is we're feeling the same forces in a way, but it's not being discussed properly, and that's why there's next to no coverage of the farmers on the streets all across Europe. So I'm going to just stop there, Dennis, and we can have some discussion later.
Yeah, that's fine, Bob, because there's one particular question I'm going to pose to you in the discussion. Ray McGovern always talks about what he called the Mickey Mat, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia think tank complex. Matter of fact, that's now a word in the Urban Dictionary. Now, one of the things that we found when we began to take apart the idea of how the present day military financial elements are constructed of this complex is that a lot of the people that own the military also own the food. And that's something I'm going to come back to later that you may want to just discuss in terms of the fact that the same actors, whether we're talking about, for example, Ukraine in specific, and the buying up and the taking up of the farmland there massively, which has happened. These things are intertwined with the fundamental dynamic that we're seeing of destruction. And it's something that the International Peace Coalition, I know, have begun to investigate. But I want to now shift over because we've got two other presentations. We're a little bit behind because of some of the technical problems. And I want to go to Professor Oliver Boyd-Barrett. Now, Professor Barrett, who's been very active with us, actually with the International Peace Coalition, a good friend of Ray McGovern's, has a lot to say on a lot of things. I want to point out the following. There are theaters of operation of this of what we're looking at, whether we're talking about Ukraine or we're talking about Gaza or you're talking about other things. And well, one of the things that came up, I think Bob made this point, is that people can't see the connections. They don't see the whole. And this is something that Professor Boyd-Barrett is not only very interested in, he's very good at helping people to do that. So we're happy to have you here with us, Oliver. So take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Dennis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming in fine.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you so much for having me on, Dennis. And I want to take a moment just to congratulate you and Anastasia and all of the others who have been party to the international peace campaign. And just to note the extraordinary success that the campaign has had, and as we have heard today, over the past, only the past 35 weeks. Some astonishing successes there. Well done. following up from your introduction, Dennis, I think maybe the best way that I can use my time here today with you all is to try and put what we are right now primarily concerned about and worried about for very good reason, namely the genocide in Gaza and also the ongoing famine in Gaza, which is being weaponized by the Israelis. So this is affecting, we're talking about 1.5 to 2 million people who are starving. And as we also heard that one of the UN agencies most best positioned to address these kind of crises now on the basis of quite possibly false allegations from a discredited source, namely the Israeli government, because it's claiming that a tiny number of UNRWA employees out of 30,000, I believe Ray McGovern told us a little bit earlier, may have some connection with Hamas, may have had some connection with the events of October the 7th. Well, of course, I mean, a UN agency in Gaza where up until October the 7th, Hamas was the governing authority, inevitably Palestinian members of UN agencies are almost by definition going to have some kind of connection to Hamas. So the whole storyline is just ridiculous. It's absurd. It's insulting, of course, to the people of Palestine and to the people of the world. So that, of course, naturally, this is what we are mainly preoccupied by, I know, but I want to take a few minutes to try and put this in the broader context that better enables us, I believe, to understand what is going on and the magnitude of the forces that we are arraigned against. And what is going on right now is a multi-pronged counter-revolution spearheaded by the United States and its allies, its closest allies, many of them, of course, former imperial powers, a counter-revolution against the developments in recent decades that have crystallized in the form of the BRICS and of similar alliances based in the global South. And it is a counter-revolution in defense of U.S. hegemony, but also, and inspired by the remarks just now from Mr. Baker, it is also a counter-revolution in defense of monopoly capitalism. Which is now basically controlled by sort of a very small handful of gigantic financial institutions. The most important thing to say about this counter-revolution is that it is failing. The principal prongs of the attack right now are Ukraine, the Middle East, and in China, or against China with respect to the status of Taiwan. There are many other potential conflicts that or areas of instability that could overnight quickly be developed by the United States and its allies into full-scale crises, but 3 is enough to be going on with. And the interesting thing about all of these fronts, if you like, in the giant counter-revolution, is that in all cases, the United States and its allies are failing. How are they failing? Let's take, to begin with, Ukraine. Clearly, it is clear now to practically any serious observer that the forces of Russia in Ukraine are now in a state of, I would say, active offense. And this is applied right across all up the 1,000 kilometers or so of the combat line in eastern Ukraine, mostly manifested right now in the areas of Avdiivka and Bakhmut. But I don't want to get into the details. And this is in the context, as we all know, of a major diminution in the scale of Western aid of weapons and finance and training and all the rest of it to Ukraine, largely because the package of aid that Joe Biden wanted to give to Ukraine before Christmas, the $61 billion, has been held up by a Republican Party that is increasingly skeptical about this squandering of U.S. treasure on a lost cause, namely the cause of Ukraine, in the NATO's forever war against Russia, and because the likely presidential candidate later this year is going to for the Republican Party is going to be Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is now insisting, advising his colleagues not to play with the Democrats in any way to help them get this package through, not even to come to any kind of deal with respect to giving money to Ukraine in return for Republican support for, or rather in return for greater democratic aid or investment in trying to resolve the problems of the southern border of the USA. So it ain't going to happen. There's going to be no more money from the U.S. Is my conclusion, is my prediction, is my conclusion. Even if some minor measures are taken, as for example in the supply of long-range bombs, or long-range guided glide bombs to Ukraine. They have a range of over 100 kilometers. But I don't believe that any of those kind of measures are going to make much difference, or if any difference, to the situation on the ground. Another factor with respect to Ukraine right now that leads me to conclude this whole thing is rapidly spiraling downwards, is the current stagnant pause in Kiev with respect to a long-standing dispute between the two principal characters in Kiev in this piece of theater, Zelensky, the president, and his commander-in-chief, Zaluzhny. So Zelensky now for some time has been attempting to get rid of Zaluzhny, who he sees as a potential rival should we ever have any semblance of democracy again in Ukraine. Zaluzhny would possibly stand against Zelensky. Zelensky's going to lose anyway, but he definitely doesn't want to see Zaluzhny replace him in any upcoming election. We thought that Victoria Nuland's visit to Kiev earlier this week, I think it was Monday, we thought that Nuland, and maybe she did, Nuland would pass down her instructions as to who is going to lead Ukraine, just as she passed down instructions back in 2014 as to who was going to lead Ukraine after the US-backed and Banderite implemented or Banderite executed coup d'etat against the Yanukovych regime. I shouldn't say regime. It was a democratically elected government. Not only was it democratically elected, it was due to stand for re-election within a few months. But no, that wasn't good enough for the United States. They just had to be absolutely sure they could get rid of Yanukovych before he had an opportunity to turn down, as he was then indicating that he would, an EU deal of subsidy to Ukraine, as opposed to a much better, much more generous and less conditioned offer of further subsidy from Russia. So they had to get rid of him, they thought, as quickly as possible early in 2014. Anyways, we don't know what Nuland had to say in Kiev back on Monday of this week. At first, it seemed that maybe she had said that, hey, Zelensky, you just got to go. You've lost the counteroffensive. You don't have any plan for future military action against Russia that seems at all plausible. You just got to get out. Well, it's still not clear. Zelensky is still there. He has not resigned. There has been no formal notice of dismissal. If this situation continues for many more days, I think we could conclude that Zelensky's grip on power is slipping from his hands in favor of a somewhat disorganized, uneasy military. And the situation in Ukraine has failed not just militarily on the battlefield. It's failed not only politically because of the current disintegration of the political apparatus there. I should have mentioned the name Bodanov, who's the head of the military intelligence, and Zelensky thought that Bodanov would accept appointment to replace Zelensky. Bodanov then on Monday said no, he wouldn't. He didn't want the job after all, and at this point in time, none of us are sure. But it does seem as though Zelensky can't find anybody to replace Zelensky. So that's a mess. And it's also a mess economically, not simply because, of course, the country has been torn apart by war, not only because its exports of grains and so on have been damaged as a result of the situation in the Black Sea and the blockading of ports and so on. I mean, it's a very complicated story, but that ultimately has gravely impacted the Ukrainian economy, but also because economically the Ukraine war has ultimately begun to tear Europe apart, and we've seen some instances of that already today in the discussions about the revolts by European farmers across several European countries, including even countries like Poland and Romania and Hungary, who are supposedly, lesser Hungary, but particularly Poland, who are supposedly kind of allies of Ukraine. But their farmers don't like the economic impact of cheap Ukrainian grain now creeping in greater quantities through their territories as Ukraine ever more desperately searches for ways of getting the Ukrainian agricultural produce out to the wider world. But much, much more gravely, the Ukraine war, and in particular the measures that were taken by the EU to try and constrain, as they thought, to try to constrain and to weaken Russia at the beginning, or even before the beginning of the conflict, in the form of sanctions, in particular sanctions against Russian energy. Well, as we see now, 2 years further down the line, the Russian economy is doing quite well. I would say it is humming, with an increase in GDP of, I think it was around 3% last year, and probably a similar percentage this year. So the Russian economy is humming. The rest of Europe is either in economic decline or is simply stagnant. And most grave is the case of Germany, of course. Once the economic engine of Europe, and its position in that has now been overtaken by Russia. So Russia is now, in terms of PPP, Russia is now a stronger, more vibrant economy than Germany. Well, much more vibrant, because Russia is growing and Germany is collapsing. It is becoming deindustrialized, principally, first and foremost, because of Europe's sanctions against Russia, in particular against Russian energy, Russia's cheap oil and gas exports, and of course Europe's complicity in what we can, I think, call either the U.S. enacted or the U.S. backed destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines a few months ago. Something which even before the beginning of the conflict, Biden himself said he was going to do. So if Russia attacked, so when a U.S. president says, "Well, this is what I'm going to do if Russia does this," and then it actually happens, I think the odds are pretty strong that it was Biden who kind of did it with his neocon allies in Washington at the time. So this is great benefit to the United States, of course. The fact that Europe as an economic threat to U.S. hegemony is now gravely injured. It is bleeding slowly to death on the economic battlefield in favor of the United States, and with the direct complicity of Europe and Europe's leaders. And depriving, therefore, European industry, particularly German industry, of the cheap oil and gas from which its economy had so much benefited before this conflict broke out. And those benefits of cheap Russian oil and gas are now going to all of Europe's competitors, all of American competitors too. Countries, for example, like India and like China, who have become major consumers of of this cheap Russian energy to feed their industrial machines. China already accounts for 35% of the total global manufacturing output. 35%, just one country, China, is responsible for 35% of everything manufactured on this globe. It's ahead of the next 9 countries. That's how big China has become in real economic terms. So Ukraine, a total failure. I guess, please, Dennis, you're going to have to just stop me when you need to. I totally appreciate what you have to do. But I will try to address my arguments with respect to why do I say that this multi-pronged attack, or this multi-pronged counter-revolution in the defense of U.S. hegemony and in defense of monopoly capitalism, why is it a failure then in the Middle East? We've talked a lot today, as we should be talking, about the horror of Gaza. how is this a failure? How does it become a failure if the United States is complicit with Israel in this horror that has so far taken the lives of about 27,000 Palestinians? I believe the majority, very large number of them are women and young children. And then, of course, in addition to them, another 70,000 wounded. So how do we talk about this being a failure for the United States and Israel? Well, I would say first and foremost, that the horror of Gaza has now underlined in a way that even more brutally obvious and apparent than even the totally deceitful, mendacious invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003 on totally fabricated evidence, WMND. Even more than that egregious manifestation of the poverty of the Western Alliance as a moral leader of the world in this century. The genocide in Gaza has totally demolished this always fragile structure of self-esteem and rather pompous and vomit-making pretense of moral superiority. The moral superiority of Western civilization going back to the Greeks, yada, 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 yada. It's just demolished now in the eyes of the global South. That in itself, you pull that claim to moral superiority from the edifice of Western empire or US-led Western empire, and pretty much the whole structure. You can just sit back now and just watch it collapse. But there are other reasons for saying that the situation in the Middle East is proving to be an utter failure in the US-led counter-revolution. And we can talk about how it has exposed not the strength of Israel, it's exposing its weakness. It's exposing its corruption. It's exposing the idiocy of Israeli politics. It's exposing the very foundations of any kind of legitimacy that this state ever had. Then it's not being fought very efficiently or compellingly in terms of military success. The losses are not clear to us, but it's pretty clear that there are significant losses to the IDF. And the Israeli economy is deeply impacted by the loss of labor power that's involved in mobilizing a reserve army that is the basis for the IDF to fight a war that seems likely to be continuing now for months, maybe years. How is it a failure? It's a failure because, of course, the US neocons, already having more or less destroyed Ukraine and helped to kill upwards of 500,000, at least kill and gravely wound up to 500,000 Ukrainian, mainly men, and to have lost millions of population who have fled to neighboring countries. So having just destroyed Ukraine, the neocons now are wanting to improve on this reputation for destruction by opening a war with Iran. And of course, the situation in Gaza has provided them with yet another pretext for beating the drums of war against Iran. They began to do this by totally overreacting in terms of the amount of firepower and personnel that they sent down to the Eastern Mediterranean and to the Red Sea. We are now engaged in a sort of tit-for-tat war. Nobody quite understands who fires first and who is it who is firing and what it is they're aiming at and what their objectives are. It's all incredibly unclear, but what is definitely clear is that we are very, very close to something being done that will lead to an escalation of in the relations between Iran and the United States, perhaps outright war, which probably the United States will lose for many reasons, not only Iran's military strength, but also because of the inevitability that a wider war will force Russia's hand. And please, Dennis, should I stop at this point?
I need to, if you can just summarize, I have something pertaining to this which just came in, which is why, if you would just...
Cool. Okay, so that's that. I would continue along those lines, and then finally, and not least, how do we see the situation in East Asia representing a failure? The United States has done whatever it can to provoke a conflict in East Asia, using Taiwan as a pretext, just as it used Ukraine as a pretext to get at Russia. But it's not going to work. And it's not going to work for a whole variety of reasons, not least of which is the strength of China's alliances with Russia and with not only with its partners in the BRICS, including of course India, which has the same. Together, China and India, 3 billion people they account for now out of a world total of about 70.5 billion, but also because of China's smartness in its Belt and Road initiative, now a couple of decades gestation, its ability to construct very positive alliances with countries around the world that helps them to grow and helps their people to become more prosperous, something that the United States doesn't even care about. It would rather impoverish people than make them more prosperous. That's the only, that's about as far as the American imagination will go. Let's become more powerful by impoverishing everyone else. Well, China is playing the diametrically opposite game. And you know what? People around the world love it. And they don't even get lectured about supposed human rights abuses. I'll stop there, Dennis. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Oliver. Actually, I want to make sure we do a transcript of what you said because of the nature of what you brought up. And the end, particularly, there's an idea that we've been trying to begin to discuss. We'll get a chance probably here in a moment of the difference between power and force. And this is not intended to be semantic at all. I just want to leave that hanging out there because I think we have something special which Kynan Thistlewaite is going to open. Okay, there you are, Kynan. Just let us know what you have.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for allowing me to deliver this statement. So this is a statement from one of our friends in Syria named Haidar Mustafa. He's a 30-year-old Syrian journalist, and he was also a participant in our January 20th Schiller Institute Youth Dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And he had something to say in relation to the recent attacks, U.S. attacks, that took place in Syria and Iraq. So let me just read it now. To all those around the world who still care about humanity, fellow activists and opinion leaders everywhere, greetings to all of you. I am speaking to you from Syria now, about another bloody night caused by the American occupation of our lands. American forces carried out heavy bombing on the eastern region of Syria. At least 3 cities were in the targeted area. Those are Deir ez-Zor, Al-Mayadin, and Al-Bukamal. 85 raids were carried out by strategic bombers and warplanes under the pretext of confronting Iran, but in reality, the victims were mostly Syrian citizens, both civilian and military. We are not surprised by this brutality from the American administration, rather than we are surprised that the world is silent. Neither the American administration nor any party in the world has the right to claim to defend itself in this barbaric manner that targets the wrong parties and civilians. The most important point in this is, why is the United States of America fighting this battle thousands of kilometers away from its territory? Does the bombing of the Syrian army and its allies and the destruction of their positions in the desert achieve the alleged goal of eliminating the terrorist organization ISIS? In fact, the raids launched yesterday targeted advanced positions of the Syrian army and its allies in the desert and on the contact lines with the terrorist organization ISIS. Was the goal to create gaps that would allow the terrorist organization to expand in that region? Last night, the scene in Deir ez-Zor was reminiscent of the scene in Baghdad in 2003. This violence seems to be an official feature of the various American administrations, because of which we are experiencing these tragic events in the Middle East. Dear colleagues, the United States says it is responding to the recent killing of its soldiers in Jordan, but can we ask why they are there in the first place? What role does the United States play in the east and the northeast of Syria, other than securing the theft of oil and wheat, supporting separatist groups, and providing cover for the terrorists in its training at the Al-Tanf base? In conclusion, this brutality cannot continue. What happened yesterday will not set limits for anyone in the region, but rather will push everyone towards more retaliatory operations. It seems that the United States is doing everything in its power to drag the region into an open war, and this is what we don't want. So, we call on the world to line up with us and push for peace and calm, and to put an end to these crimes by the American administration and the Israeli administration. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Kainan, for reading that statement. So that was, again, Haidar Mustafa, who's a Syrian journalist, 30 years old, and he requested that we read that. So now we are going to go to Ray McGovern. People generally know Ray, CIA analyst for 27 years, always with us on this whenever he can be in our struggle here to make things clear to people. And Ray, we're just going to leave it open to you as to what you'd like to discuss. I'm going to have a couple of questions for you as well others after you finish, and we'll go right kind of into discussion after your remarks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dennis. Can I be heard?
Yes, you're very clear.
Okay, good. Well, thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Tynan. Thank everyone. Professor Oliver Boyd-Barrett, for a very succinct description of this very sad picture we face. It's really, really hard to inject a lighter touch into all this, but let me just rehearse this past week. Zelensky to Zaluzhny, Zaluzhny back to Zelensky. You're delusional, Zaluzhny. No, you're delusional, Zelensky. Yeah, it sounds like a bagel shop down on 47th and 5th Avenue in New York. It also sounds very much like Gogol, Nikolai Gogol's very, very famous play, Revizor, which means Inspector General. Now, Oliver, you will know this quite well. I suffice it to say that Danny Kaye, one of the greatest comedians of the world for you younger generation, look it up. The Inspector General. He did his own version of this, and he talked about Dobchinski, delusional Dobchinski. It was so. If you want a lighter touch here, read or watch Danny Kaye's movie, The Inspector General, or better still, read Gogol's classic Revisor, The Inspector General. I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine either. More important, neither does the wicked witch of the West, Victoria Nolan. It looks like she's bought Zelensky some time. He's the protege, of course. But you would expect that Zelensky would have cashiered Zelensky, and Zelensky would, hello. So Zelensky's still there. So don't be delusional or illusory about all this, but it's going to happen probably next couple of weeks. Ukraine will admit that it has lost, and that the United States, despite promises to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, has changed that to as long as it can, and it can't without any more money from Congress. And I think Professor Boyd-Barrett is quite right. It ain't going to get any more money from Congress. Now, I'd like to quote something that is real enough. And I was going to deceive everyone by saying this is breaking news just in, but I won't do that. I'll just quote the New York Times. And it says, Tony Blinken told an audience in Berlin last week, Russia has a huge amount of military equipment and military force. Anything we did as countries in terms of military support for Ukraine is likely to be matched and then doubled and then tripled and quadrupled by Russia. New York Times continues. That argument seems very closely to channel Obama's views, indicating his doubts. Obama is said to say, okay, what happens if we send in equipment? Do we have to send in trainers then? And one person said, well, Obama keeps saying, what if Putin escalates? And here's the most notable quote here. Here's Obama warning about what exactly would happen. Quote, arming the Ukrainians would encourage the notion that they could actually defeat the far more powerful Russians. And so it would potentially draw a more forceful response from Moscow, and we don't have escalatory dominance in the area. Okay, well, now, that was Blinken 10 years ago. He was Deputy Secretary of State. That was the old Blinken. Now he's got the new Blinken, who says quite different things. The old Obama was advised by Susan Rice, who was said to have agreed with him. But now we have somebody advising the president who is quite different. That is Jacob Sullivan. Now, this guy is one of the best and the brightest. I want to tell you, he went to all the right schools. He's very young, but Hillary Clinton picked him out of nowhere and said, go with Jacob Sullivan. And just to put this into perspective, he knows so much that Foreign Affairs, the most prestigious journal in the United States, gave him 7,000 words to say in an edition that appeared 5 days before Hamas attacked Israel. What did it say? It said, Sullivan, the Middle East is still beset with challenges, but the region is quieter today than it has been for decades. he adds that in the face of serious frictions, quote, we have de-escalated crises in Gaza, period, end quote. Okay, that appeared 5 days before the October 7th attacks. What's my point here? My point here is that it's not only Zelensky and Zelensky that are delusional. These guys still think they're right. In this case, Sullivan and Blinken. And they're leading us down a very difficult, very strange path here. I'll just say one more thing, because I think Oliver summed it up so well, both Ukraine and the other areas he covered. We're talking about UNRWA, the UN body that supplies aid to the Palestinian. There are 30,000 people employed by UNRWA. And as Professor Boyd-Barrett mentioned, 12 of those were fingered by the Israelis as being complicit with Hamas. 12 out of 36,000. Whoa. Oh, that wasn't, they couldn't come up with 12. They didn't whittle it down to 6. 6 were cooperating with Hamas. Now, they gave that information to Tony Blinken and to the administration in Washington. And what did Tony Blinken say? Well, here's what he said. Tony Blinken, we have not independently verified the evidence, but we think it's very credible. How can you think it's very credible if you have not independently investigated the evidence? 6 out of 36,000? And we are not only prolonging genocide, but famine? Now, Professor Boyd-Barrett and I come from the same Irish heritage. We know what famine was, and we know that our great-great-great-grandparents somehow survived when 1 million of their contemporaries did not survive, when there was famine in Ireland in the middle of the 19th century, and there was plenty of food, but it was all going to Britain for export to the colonies. 1 million. I'm not quite sure when Oliver came to this country, when mine came after the famine. And my grandparents and their parents were never willing to tell us about it. It was so bad. So what I'm saying now is that despite the independent or the International Court of Justice ruling that Israel should prevent genocide, and famine, of course, is one quick way to starve people to death. We're talking starvation. We're talking, as we in Ireland call it, the Great Hunger, okay? That's what's going on now, folks. Now, we're Americans, okay? And we can be bystanders just like the good Germans in Nazi Germany, or we can put ourselves into it, okay? Now, people like Tynan and others are speaking out at every conceivable venue. The president himself has been interrupted. I love that little clip of that freshman congressman, and where was it? Michigan, I guess. I mean, we got to do that, folks. We got to do it quickly before famine takes its toll. And, we have to do it like today and not tomorrow. So that would be my admonition, or at least my encouragement to the rest of us. It's nice to make speeches like I'm doing now. It's nice to write articles, however erudite. We have to put our bodies into it and stop these crazy elite rulers of ours from enabling Israel to commit genocide, part of which, of course, is famine. What they want to do, of course, is exterminate the Palestinians. Now, extermination, that was a word that when I was young, long time ago, during World War II, that was used frequently to indicate what the Germans were doing to the Jews. Isn't it a quirk of history? Isn't it really sad that we have the descendants of those Jews, those people in Israel now, 70% in favor of genocide against Palestinian brothers and sisters, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it without our support. And if we live in a democracy, we've got to show our opposition to that. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ray. And what we'll do is we want to bring everybody up on screen because of some of the technical problems we had before and limits of time. Got about 20 minutes right now, and I've got a few things to pose. I see also some people may have some responses. I'm going to go to Anastasia here first but this will relate to what you are talking about also, Ray, because the issue is what can we do? Now, obviously, some things have been happening, and yesterday when we were in the discussion, Helga took up concerning this question of the UN Relief and Work Agency that I think there's 18 countries that have withdrawn funds, which is almost the entire budget. And so her point was, well, there have to be demonstrations in all of those countries and a shaming of those people and those institutions that did that. But there may have been some other things, Anastasia, that came out of the meeting that you may want to emphasize as well. So let me go to you first. Also, any response you have to anything else that you heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, even if you're not in one of those countries, you can definitely go to their embassy and organize demonstrations in front of their embassy. And the International Peace Coalition, we have a couple of statements that you can grab. You can find that at the schillerinstitute.com website. It's right on the homepage, or you can go to the little button on the top under initiatives, and you'll see International Peace Coalition there. But definitely organize everything you got to go out there and really make the pressure known on an international scale. If we coordinate something like this on an international scale and they feel it, that this is not globally accepted, that you are going not only to starve people out, but you pair that with what Israel has been doing with the flooding, right, which was revealed with the flooding of of Gaza and with salt water, where they're literally salting the earth. So if they're not receiving money and food and water, and they can't grow anything, how are they supposed to live? These are still acts of genocide, right? After the ICJ ruling. So we have to go out there and make this incredibly clear to people. We should definitely target all of the congressmen who are on this letter to Blinken, who denounced the ICJ ruling. Those are definitely top priority. And one thing I would recommend, which we've been doing, is you can go to, you can actually look up the money that congressmen have received and who's been giving it to them. And let's start finding out where their campaign finances have been coming from. I can almost guarantee you the people who signed this letter, which I found, at least my congressman, they're receiving money from the military-industrial complex. Use that. Go after them publicly on that. And that'll have a huge impact. And you start making this known, you start turning people. And what I found in my organizing is that most people, they don't want to support a genocide. They don't want to support the United States, our country, doing something evil, let alone another country doing something evil. They just need to know what's going on and to have definitive proof, and for them to have that internal gut feeling that they must act to do something for the good. So please go out there and do that with us. Find and hunt down your congressmen. Use the opportunity of their town hall meetings to go after them on this, and go outside of their offices. Meet with them as well. And we do call them interventions for a reason. I like to say that our congressmen are unfortunately addicted to being corrupt. So we have to intervene on them in the hopes that they will change. And even if they don't, the people that are in the room or who watch your intervention when you record it will be intervened upon themselves, and they'll take action to go do what you're doing as well. So I'll just add that in there.
Yeah, Bob, I want to ask you a question, if you're there, right? Which is this: you've used, see, much of what Anastasia just referred to. These things are can be made available through the Executive Intelligence Review publications and so on. But Bob, I wanted to ask you to say a little bit. You've been organizing with in the farm sector for a long time. Obviously, there's a change right now. One of the things that I reference, and maybe you can give a reference to this directly, is that the same people who are running the operations on the farm sector are the people that run, as we found out, the actual or the actual property title owners, if you will, to the military industrial complex. Things like BlackRock or other entities that wouldn't be assumed to be the center of all this. If you could just say something about that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly true. And this is what is so serious about, especially when you're dealing with the agricultural policy, because the consolidation that has come to this point is a slow form of genocide potential because of what can happen with the logistics breakdown that could be set in place by both financial blowout, which is imminent, and the energy flows and food flows through a globalist transportation system that has, we've seen just in the last 12 months can be completely crippled. So, so you take BlackRock, you take South Street, you take Vanguard, these kind of things. I mean, the biggest, pork growing company in the United States is called Smithfield Foods. They produce some delicious pork. They're big. They're owned by WH Inc., which is the biggest pork company in the world, located in Shanghai. But usually it's blamed on the Chinese as being the owners. But when you get to looking at who the shareholders are, you see two of the biggest shareholders are Goldman Sachs Bank in New York and the California Teachers Pension Fund, things like that. So when you go through and you look at who owns the chemical companies and the fertilizer companies, you find all these major operations. I mean, it's not by accident that one of the biggest fertilizer distributors in the world, the biggest shareholder is the King of Norway. These are all kinds of interesting things that never get discussed out in the public or in the mainstream press. And that's what we're putting together, is to show people when you have consolidation in the United States, with the types of food producing capability the U.S. has, and you see that 7.5% of the farmers in the United States produce basically 90% of all the food. That is a consolidation the world has never seen, and that is very vulnerable. And the problem, another very sad thing about the process is the lack of people's ability to look over their shoulder and see this, see what they become a part of, what they actually blindly just support and think is that's the American system. That's just what you do. But see, it's not working, as we see with like Secretary of Agriculture said, 39,000 farmers went out of business. We got the dairy receipts down 81%. And you haven't noticed milk going down much in the grocery store and the food prices, except now, we import 90% of the lamb that we eat in the United States. 70%, is imported. We could produce all of it. We could produce twice that much. We're now importing more beef than we export, when in fact our beef herds are at the lowest they've been in almost 75 years. So that's, again, not by chance. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I have a particular question for you, Ray, which I think Oliver may also have a view of, and I think it's an important one, which actually it has to be somebody like you that has to answer it. I've been trying to call people's attention to Vladimir Putin and what he's been talking about in recent days, because there have been two major commemorations, military commemorations in Russia. One is the 80th anniversary of the lifting of the siege at Leningrad, and that was on January 27th. And then I guess 2 days ago, or yesterday maybe it was the anniversary of the lifting of the siege of Stalingrad, which was in 43. So it's the 81st anniversary. And there are these speeches that are being given, and Putin is saying various things. And there's something that I think you touched on your family's experience in the Great Famine. In Leningrad, there were over 1 million people that died in that siege, the majority of whom starved to death or froze and starved to death. Putin's from there. That's his city. The equivalent would be if something like 3.5 million people had died in New York City, let's say, or 1 million people in Chicago in the course of the war, with the others having evacuated and so on. And so, it's for both of you. How do you think, given the difference in the perception of war that you have between, let's say, Russia and certainly the leadership of Russia, and what we are seeing in London and in America and in other capitals for that matter, Ottawa, what's the greatest danger we have? I'm thinking about that Jake Sullivan story about, everything is fine in the Middle East. That's it. So, Ray, I'd like to start with you, and then Oliver, if you have a comment as well.
Most people don't realize. May I be heard? I can be heard?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people don't know that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin had a big brother. He was born in Leningrad during the siege. He was a little baby, but his mother had no milk or no food to give him. And so, as a desperate measure, she gave him to some nurses who had an inn with a hospital that did have some milk and did have some food. She never saw him again. When President Putin, was in Leningrad 2 years ago, before this incredible, it's not really a monument, it covers the million that perished during the siege of Leningrad, which lasted almost 1,000 days, okay? He was asked by a reporter, so, Mr. President, do you know where your brother Victor is buried? And he winced and he said, yeah, over there. So, what am I saying here? I'm saying that, as you suggested, Dennis, Putin and many of his contemporaries have had experience with war. Certainly their fathers did, and their mothers. They know what war is, okay? Look at Biden. Biden had some deferments, right? He wanted to be a lawyer, right? So how many deferments did he have? 5. Like Cheney. 5. Now, none of the people leading our government have had a military uniform on. I think that's a real lack. I don't think they know what war is. More important, I think President Putin believes that they don't know what war is. And so Putin himself, just 2 weeks ago, said, look, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Putin, it was Lavrov, the foreign minister. He said, look, you Americans, you've been protected in world wars by 2 very big oceans. Don't expect to be protected like that by those same oceans again. So, what the Russians, as I see it, are trying to say to Mr. Biden and his acolytes, look, wise up. Obama was right. It's a fool's errand to think you can beat us where our core interests are involved, that you can get Ukraine, for whatever reason, into NATO and threaten us on our border with installations such as we tried to put in Cuba back 61 years ago. That's a fool's errand. Wake up. You're losing. Let's talk. We'll be as discreet and we'll be as measured as we can be, but you've lost in Ukraine. You're going to lose big in the Middle East. And China, you don't have a prayer against China. Come to your senses. Let's talk.
Thank you. Oliver?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on the concept of famine, thinking, first of all, that the United States is hardly a stranger to genocide for obvious reasons, and is not a stranger either to the weaponization of famine. And I'm thinking now of Syria, which has been subject, as you know, to a decade's worth of what we can loosely call civil strife that's been perpetrated, was initiated by interventions of various kinds by the United States, by some of the more theocratic, autocratically inclined Middle Eastern Arabic states from about but when it comes to America was fiddling around, messing about in Syria from as early as 1957. They came up with a plan for the assassination of Syrian leaders as early as 1957, and then that hostility to Syria intensified when the Baathists came to power. Why was America so hostile to the Baathist regime of Hafiz Assad, father of Bashar, as early as the 1960s? Well, because the Baathist movement was a socialist movement, and it was an Arabic movement. It was a movement to represent, to build a stronger sense of Arab unity, but in a socialistic mode. So the United States couldn't live with either Arabism, nor could it live with socialism. And they've been messing about and trying to destabilize and working with the Muslim Brotherhood and all the usual gang of fanatic Islamist extremists that Western empires have found it so convenient to use time after time after time after time again. And so we plunged Syria into, we plunged it, we tried to plunge it back into the Stone Age, and we nearly got there. But Assad hung on, not least because he had two very effective allies in both Russia and Iran. And that's part of the reason for this 10-year destabilization effort, was because Syria was seen as the gateway to Iran. You could take out Syria, and then the road would be that much clearer towards finally taking down. Anyway, get back to the idea of famine. So who won this destabilization? Well, Assad is still there, so kind of he won. But on the other hand, his country, at the time of the supposed end to this conflict, of course it didn't end, because the United States still has troops in Syria, still controls up to approximately, with its Kurdish allies, still controls up to about 1/3 of Syrian territory. It steals the harvests in this area. That's food that should be going to the Syrian people. And it steals Syrian oil, which the Kurds help the United States to sell to Israel. There's one source of cheap energy to Israel that comes from stolen Syrian oil. And to add further insult to injury, then the United States introduced the Caesar Act a couple of years ago that essentially imposes such draconian sanctions on Syria. The country is totally unable to reconstruct itself following the devastation of the imposed destabilization attempt. And its people, the majority of people who live in Syria are on the edge of starvation. And this is because that's what the United States wants. It can't win the war in other ways. So it just is intending to win through starving Syria into submission. And in that way also punishing Syria's allies, both Russia and Iran. So yes, we can have quick genocides and we can have slow genocides, but it's all genocide, and a large part of the genocide is to do with starvation.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to conclude with, we have one thing which we're going to ask Ray to take up, which is a short clip from Foreign Minister Pandor of South Africa. Ray, we need a response from you. And then Anastasia, just a few aspects of what people can do. And then we're going to conclude. So if we can see that video.
You know, I think this notion of international rules is very comfortable for some people to use when it suits them. But they don't believe in international rules when it doesn't suit them, because they don't apply international rules or law equally in all circumstances. So you can't say because Ukraine has been invaded that suddenly sovereignty is important, but it was never important for Palestine. It's very peculiar. If you believe in international law truly, then wherever sovereignty is infringed, it must apply. And this is the point we've been making, that we use the framework of international law unequally, depending on who is affected. And we are arguing that that must change. And one of the interesting changes that has occurred is the sudden movement, because Russia has invaded Ukraine, that we say, okay, let's not allow the Security Council to just have the veto and let it pass. We take it to the General Assembly. When some of us had been calling for the General Assembly to have a greater say, we never enjoyed support. But suddenly today, see, that's where international law begins to mean nothing. Because for some, we see it as a cheating, and for others, we see it as a benefit. So our argument is, let's revise the international multilateral system to ensure that we observe that post-1948 has arrived.
Okay, so Ray, obviously either all of us are human or none of us are human. And if we are all human, then the same laws are supposed to apply to everybody equally. And clearly this is the time to redefine things, and we're all very involved in this. But we just wanted to have you be the kind of representative respondent on this question.
Well, I think one has to, however briefly, go back 400 years, where our founding fathers declared that all men are created equal, except the black ones that we enslaved. They weren't really equal. Now, 4 centuries later, you have, of all things, the South Africans who have suffered under apartheid, rising to the occasion with incredibly smart lawyers and other highly educated people to tell us about how all men really are created equal, and that there are still UN institutions of redress for people like the Palestinians. And her performance and the performance of the South African delegation there at the International Court of Justice is something marvelous to everyone to see, and you may have trouble seeing it because for some reason it was not covered by mainstream media. Oh, you may have seen the Israeli presentation. That was covered fully. Well, that was the next day. Okay. One little added thing here. I may have mentioned this before, but I had a chance to go into the Israeli Knesset. Okay. Some people say, how'd you? Miko Peled, my good friend and an Israeli citizen, helped me get in. And we met with the Palestinian part of the Knesset. There were still about 4 or 5 Palestinian representatives there. Okay. And they had a conference room not bigger than this little office that I have here. Okay. But prominently displayed on the walls were a big portrait of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and right next to him, Rosa Parks. Okay. Now I'm sure next time I go in there, if ever, there'll be a picture of this incredible foreign minister from South Africa. Suffice it to say, there is hope. Okay. There is hope, and we'll have to see what the International Court of Justice can do. I don't dismiss the possibility that this will redound not only in a moral way, but in a practical way to rein in people like Biden and the people who are advising him, and ipso facto, rein in the culprits of genocide in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
Thank you, Ray. Anastasia, what would you like to tell us all that we should be doing?
Well, I just know from my experience as an organizer that the thing that holds you back, that prevents you from doing what you know is the right thing to do, are often these small blocks which are centered around fear. Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to lose my job? Or am I going to get killed? Right? These are things that you do have to face. But ask yourself this question: what is your life worth living if you don't do what you know is the right thing to do? What kind of life was lived? And imagine putting yourself in that position where you decide, I'm going to do what is the most profound thing for humanity. And what I'm seeing right now, which is incredibly moving to me personally, is that I see people who are making that decision, who are deciding that their life is going to be a vessel in order to bring about the best of humanity, to express and represent the best of humanity, embody it. So I'm calling upon you, all the viewers on this call, take what you've heard today. Take what you heard from Professor Oliver Boyd, from Bob Baker, from Rayner, from Ray McGovern, from all of these people and what they've presented to you, and use it. Use it to go out into, especially in the United States, but in other countries as well, internationally, to be part of an international civil rights movement. We absolutely need this now. We have been on the verge of nuclear war. I don't even know how much closer we can get to this situation, but I can feel in my gut that if we had enough people who made this decision, who made these decisions, they're going to fight for the best of humanity, not just to be angry at evil, but to bring about the goodness of mankind, that we can overcome this. And I want to encourage everyone to participate in that. Contact us on this, the LaRouche organization channel. You can contact us here, contact the Schiller Institute, contact your local organizations wherever you are, and mobilize now. Drop whatever you're doing, and let's do this together.
Okay, Anastasia, and I think Pastor McGovern wants to give the benediction.
No, Dennis, this is one quotation that I haven't memorized, so I dug it out just now, but it's from it's Nelson Mandela at his inaugural, okay? It's very brief, but it pertains directly to what Anastasia just said. Let me read it. It's a direct quote. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not in some of us only, it is in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. End quote. Let's go out and liberate others. Thanks.
Ray McGovern, Anastasia Battle, Bob Baker, Oliver Boyd-Barrett. I want to thank you all for being with us. I also want to thank Mr. Haidar Mustafa and also Rainer Apel from Germany, who was with us earlier. We want to thank, of course, all of you, and we want to thank you for what you're about to do. You can find out more by going to our websites at the LaRouche Organization or Schiller Institute or Executive Intelligence Review. And so we will hopefully see you before next week out in the streets and otherwise on our sites, doing everything that you can do to awaken people to how to think and act in this time of crisis. Good afternoon.